Okay, nice. Right. Hi, everybody. So today we've got with us Christian Picciolini. He's an award-winning television producer, public speaker, author, peace advocate, and a former violent extremist. Christian chronicles his involvement and exit from the early American white supremacist skinhead movement in his memoir, White American Youth. He now leads the Free Radicals Project, a global extremism prevention and disengagement network, and has helped over 300 individuals leave hate behind. He showcases in disengagement work in the second book, Breaking Hate, published in February 2020 by Hatchet Books, as well as the MSNBC documentary series of the same name. And crucially for us, he's a punk rocker and a dad. And that's why we're here. So, so I'm Chris. We've also got Matthew here as well from the group, which if you don't know, is Punk Rock Dads. It's a Facebook group. There's about 7,000 of us across the world. And we're all bonded by fatherhood and our love of punk rock. So, on to that one. Christian, how old were you when you became a father? And how many children do you have?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Matthew. I've got two boys who were born in 1992 and 1994, right in the middle of when I was involved in the neo-Nazi skinhead movement in America. I was 18 years old when our first son was born, and had just turned almost 21 when our second son was born. But yeah, funny enough, or funny, they were the ones who kind of challenged me to, almost as if that somehow I connected here. But it's as if that when they were born, they really challenged my sense of identity, community, and purpose that I'd found in that movement, and really forced me to think, am I a father or am I a hate monger? And the two couldn't really coexist.
Well, I think that's it, isn't it? You mentioned you're kind of in your books, you're very big on ICP, obviously not
yeah.
But it's something that many people think that's kind of what real kind of punk rock's about. That's what a lot of teenagers are looking for: identity, community, and purpose. And people find it all over, But we found it in punk rock. But it's also what draws people into the more extremist kind of lifestyles. What was your sort of experience with that? With the kind of, was it punk first, or where did you come musically?
It was punk first for me. So I was recruited when I was 14 years old in 1987 into the white power movement, and got out by the time I was 23 in 96. But before that, when I was 12 and 13 years old, I was into punk rock. I loved bands like The Clash and the Ramones and Social Distortion, and it was kind of an entree into that movement because it was the music of the movement that really drew me in. It was edgy, like punk rock. It was this kind of British oi music that spoke to me at the time, and it wasn't much of a jump from the punk that I was listening to really start to fall in love with that kind of music that had the same vibe. Different lyrics, of course, but it was kind of the price of admission. You bought into the music, you bought into the ideology if you wanted to feel the reward of that identity, community, and purpose.
No, definitely. I mean, one of the things you've done previously was kind of with Chaos Records, your record store that you had. One thing I've always wondered after reading your book is that did any of the non-white power music that you sold? So for those who don't know, you ran a record store selling kind of effectively under the counter the white power music, but straight up, metal, ska, punk, hip hop to normal people. What sort of things did you sell there, and did that have an effect on you as kind of selling the other stuff as well?
Yeah, I mean, I started the store in '94 to with the intention of selling the white power music that I was importing and making at the time. I was in two bands, but I was also selling ska and punk and hip hop and heavy metal and hardcore and all kinds of kind of underground music that you couldn't get at Best Buy, which had just kind of opened up and it started selling CDs at a really low price. So people who came in to buy that other music that wasn't white power music, they knew who I was because I was very vocal at the time. Even though it was before the internet, I was still, very visible about what I was involved in. But they came in, instead of attacking me, they came in and challenged me with compassion. It was them really kind of taking a completely different approach they could have protested my stores. They could have broken my windows. They could have slashed my tires. They could have made it very difficult for me to operate. They could have shut down my store if they wanted to effectively. But they didn't. Instead, they came in and they shopped and they talked to me. And it was that compassion that I received from the people I least deserved it from that really was the most powerful, transformative thing for me.
No, I could imagine. It's the topic of redemption, isn't it? I mean, Matt, we've spoken about this as well quite a few times.
Yeah.
It's what can people do to, can people truly be redeemed? And is anyone past saving? We would like to think that, everyone's got skeletons in their closet, haven't they? And demons, and it's about facing them, I suppose, isn't it, Matt?
And the path to redemption isn't as simple as ABC. Sometimes it's a lot more complicated and a lot more time intensive too.
Yeah. And it's not as easy as, I think, simply saying, I'm sorry. It's about, I think, repairing the damage that you've caused, which is what I've spent, 20 plus years trying to do. And I don't know that I feel comfortable saying that I can ever be redeemed, because it's a lifelong process, right? Like for me, I know that I can't just tomorrow say, I've done enough and I'm going to stop, right? The world we live in today, it wouldn't be, first of all, genuine for me to want to stop, because I do believe in really dismantling what I helped build. But it is a lifelong process. I think redemption is possible, but I don't know that there's a finish line for it. I think once you have the calling to redeem yourself, you have to work at it for your whole life.
I think so. Yeah, I don't think you can just kind of reach a point and say, it's kind of like with the Buddhists and enlightenment, isn't it? You kind of go towards it, but you never actually reach it, do you?
Right. And plus, it's not up to me either, right? I don't get to say when I'm redeemed. So that is up to the world to judge me on, and all I can do is work towards that redemption.
Yeah, that's it. So let's kind of go on, Matt. Sorry.
I wanted to jump in, Chris. Sorry about that. Because a big part of what unites us all is fatherhood, and by proxy, our kids. How do your children view you being so open about your past?
That's a good question. I got out of the movement when they were roughly 4 and 2 years old. So luckily I never had that like drive to indoctrinate them into the movement or anything like that. And even when I was involved and they were, young children, I didn't like aspire to like recruit my children. At that point I'd already wanted to kind of make my way out. I just wasn't brave enough to do it. So they've, from the very beginning, known about my involvement. Once they were old enough to understand, those conversations, I had them with them because I wanted them to know from me what I had done, rather than, in the age of the internet, 10 years later, figure out what Dad had done. They were actually the first people to read the first draft of my book when I finished it, almost 12 years ago, my first copy, because it was important for me that they knew their father's background. I never wanted to shield them from that. And I wanted to teach them, obviously, to be better than me, by setting, that example of not to be what I had been. They've been very supportive. I mean, I couldn't have asked for 2 young men that are, that I respect more as people, as friends, as children, that, are good-hearted and compassionate. So hopefully I did a good job.
Well, that sounds like it. We can only
absolutely.
Try, can't we?
Yeah.
I mean, so what really interested me when I kind of like I said, I watched your TED Talk on YouTube. It's called My Descent into America's Neo-Nazi Movement and How I Got Out. A couple of years old now, and you've got 2.4 million views on it now, according to YouTube.
Yeah,
which is impressive.
I think it's up to like 6 or 7 million if you combine the two. Yeah. There's one on YouTube and one on a TED site, but yeah, no, it's amazing to me how far and wide that the video's gotten and how many people have reached out.
It's crazy. I mean, but since then, obviously, you've done a lot of the advocacy work, but you've also done a lot of stuff kind of behind the camera as well. So you do interviews with people like us and people asking your opinion, but also you won an Emmy for your advertising campaign. Kind of, what's it like being on the other side of the camera? Which do you prefer?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that before. I don't know that it's ever comfortable to like bare your soul on a daily basis and talk about the worst things that you've ever done. But it's necessary. And I know that my story is helping a lot of people. So it's something that I do on a daily basis. I am a creative person, so I like to be, behind the camera where people can't see me just as much as I like to be in front of the camera, kind of sharing the insight. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's 50-50 for me. I don't know which one I enjoy more. I kind of like directing and seeing the full vision, but I also kind of, like storytelling as well.
Well, I think that's good, because if you do both an equal amount, you can appreciate the other side, whichever one you're doing. But that's probably going to give you a fairly good balance of what you're doing, isn't it?
And take a break from one or the other if it's getting to be a little bit too much.
Either of them fail it.
Yeah. No, it's important. I mean, I really appreciate just, the privilege that I've been given to be able to tell my story. There's so many people who don't get second chances like I did, because of their black or brown skin or whatever the reason that they're being marginalized. And I've been given this chance, and I'm going to, make sure that I not only speak for me and the insight that I have, but I also try and raise other people's voices at the same time.
I mean, I won't go into too much detail and ruin the TED Talk kind of content, because that's obviously there and in the book. But if you could tell us just a little bit about you're out of the movement and your first job when you went back to your high school, and kind of what gave you the impetus to kind of start doing that? What was your kind of like road to Damascus kind of moment?
It was fate, kind of coming crashing down on me and like a ton of bricks, I think. I left the movement in '96, and about 4 years went by when I really was trying to outrun my past as fast as I could. I moved, I wore long sleeves, to cover my tattoos. I tried to make new friends. I tried to, everything I could to run away from who I had been without really confronting it. I certainly had changed, I'd met people, but I still wasn't really willing to confront who I had been. And in roughly '99, one of the few friends that I had came to me and she said, listen, I don't want to see you die. Like you look pretty rough right now. Things don't look great. Why don't you go apply at a job at this company that I started working at? They're hiring, entry-level positions. And it was a computer company. I had no computer experience whatsoever. And a small company called IBM, you might have heard of them. I thought she was crazy. I thought, why are they going to hire this ex-skinhead covered in tattoos? I had no college degree. I'd gone to 6 high schools. I'd been kicked out of all of them, one of them twice. And I had absolutely no shot at getting this job, but she, convinced me to go in, and I went in for an interview. And I think because it was an entry-level position and I interviewed well, they offered me the job. And the job was setting up computers at corporations and universities during the summer when their employees were not there, and they had ordered new computers and we would set them up. So it turns out that the first place that IBM placed me on my first day of work was my old high school, the same one I'd been kicked out of twice to install their computers for that summer. And, I'd gone from like this happy guy who'd just been offered a job of a lifetime to this very depressed, scared guy who knew that I was going to go back to my old high school, the same one I'd been kicked out of twice, and like get told to get out because they would recognize me, even though I had, had been at the school 8 years before and had left the movement. But I decided to go. And when I got there, after kind of like creeping around the hallways, trying to avoid being seen, a man walked by me in the hallway that I remembered. And it was the head of security, a black man who I had terrorized during my time at that high school. I'd made his life hell. We had staged sit-ins and white student union protests, and there were lots of fights. And there was even a fist fight between me and him at that time. And he didn't recognize me when he walked by, but I recognized him. And I had to make a decision at that moment. And that was to confront who I had been. So I decided I was going to follow him to the parking lot. When I got to him, he was getting into his car, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned around, and this guy's face, who normally, was very happy and jolly, was very scared when he recognized who I was. And I apologized. I said, I'm sorry for what I had done. And he accepted my apology, but then he made me promise, because he knew that wasn't good enough. He made me promise that I would tell my story and that I would repair the damage that I had caused somehow. And That was 21 years ago, and I've been keeping that promise ever since. And Mr. Holmes, that man, saved my life that day.
That's one of my kind of favorite parts of the story, and it's almost too good to be true, isn't it?
Yeah, he's still my mentor. He actually just this year, or just the previous year, retired from his job, and yeah, he's a great guy who gave me a chance. He didn't have to. This was a man I had hurt, and it wasn't his responsibility to be nice to me, but he was, and I'm grateful.
That's good of him.
On the flip side of that, Christian, and maybe you didn't do it for a reason, but one thing your book doesn't mention is whether you encountered any of the other members of the movement after you had exited. Had that ever come up, and was that something that was tough to face?
Yeah, I didn't talk about that so much in my memoir. I do talk maybe a little bit about that in my new book, Breaking Hate, but there was a period where I literally tried to detach and be as far disengaged from it as possible. I mean, I moved almost across the state or across the city, but there were moments where I did have kind of random interactions with people. You'd see them at a store, or I'd be visiting my parents who still live in the same town, and you see somebody drive by. And I have to say that I haven't had any, with the people I was closest with anyway, I haven't had any negative interactions. I have had positive interactions, though. I have had people say, I've been following your story over the years, and it forced me to look at myself and see where I had been at that time, and I'd gotten out. But I do get a lot of threats from people in the movement who I didn't know, of course, during those days. But interestingly enough, now that you bring that up, the people I knew very, very well that I know are still in the movement today have never threatened me. It's only the people who are afraid of what I'm saying now that threatens their movement that really are kind of the most vocal against me.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you answered that. There was going to be a disclaimer there. There may be a reason.
Yeah, well, there may be some of my old friends in as part of your group, and then if they are, I would urge them to really take kind of like a really good inventory of their life right now and see what they've gained and what they've lost by being a part of that. And I know that they will find that they have not gained and that they've lost a lot. And it's time to really take stock in it and maybe reassess what you've been doing.
I mean, that's in light of recent events, it's quite interesting. The topic that comes up a lot is racial equality, police brutality, and in our Facebook group particularly, it's been understandably a hotly debated topic, and particularly the politicization of both of them. What's your take on that? Kind of, you've been on arguably both sides of that, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that everything has become politicized when we're really talking about human rights.
Yeah.
In some cases.
It's tough.
It is tough, right? And I think that the politicization of it all has clouded logic in many cases, about what the issue even is, right? Here's a really good example of that. The phrase defund the police, right? Very hot phrase, right? I'm sure there have even been discussions in your group about that, right? And there are people who think, without really looking into it, and I can see how it's possible that the phrase defund the police means we're going to get rid of police, right? That the people who are saying that want nothing to do with police. They don't even want to know a police officer exists. They want to fire every single one. And that's not really the case. If you really look into that, behind that language, there is a plan. And the plan is not to abolish the police, but to take away and redirect some of the money that's gone towards the militarization of the police and redirect it towards social services that would essentially fix some of the problems that police have required that militarization, right? It's like a chicken and egg thing, right? If we're taking care of healthcare and mental health and poverty and things like that, we won't see the uptick in crime, so we won't need that militarization. So I just want people to, I guess my point is, like, when we hear something, everything's very emotional these days, is to really kind of take a step back before we act, before we judge, before we buy into some notion of something, and understand what it is that we're buying into. Right? Somebody says abolish the police, they're saying get rid of the police. right? Somebody says defund the police. That's not exactly what they're saying. They're saying, do we really need generally the police as it is now, or can we carve out a little bit of that to put towards social services? So I think that if we can just get to the point where we understand things and are willing to say, hey, I'll do a minute of extra work to understand what it is I'm fighting about, we will find that we have many fewer fights about the things that we're talking about. Because I think if you go into anybody and you ask them what's important to them anywhere in the world, they're going to tell you the same things. I want my kids to be happy. I want them to be safe. I want them to be educated. I need a job. I want to feed my family. I want to be, healthy. All these things. I want opportunity. Anywhere in the world you can go there, and we all share those same types of notions. Eventually, if we talk to somebody long enough, we may go off track, right? We may differ in our views, but we always have that reference point to go back to if we've established that. But if we start out on the opposite ends, already saying, I don't agree with you, we will never find our way to that middle. And the middle is not about, finding commonality in bad ideas. It's about finding commonality in fundamental ideas that are important to all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about being proactive rather than reactive, where that defunding can be put into social work, education, medicine, and then not eliminate the need for law enforcement, but like you said, eliminate the need for the militarization of law enforcement.
Right. Yeah, I think everybody agrees that we all want to live in a safe community where people follow the rules, and if somebody doesn't follow the rules, well, then law enforcement can step in to enforce those laws that keep us safe. But what I think, people are angry about is the fact that in so many instances, people are dying unnecessarily, and especially people of color, young Black men are being killed by police because there is this fear of what we don't understand. And I always say this: hatred is born of ignorance, fear is its father, and isolation is its mother, right? We are so afraid and so isolated from each other that it's almost as if there is no option but that uncertainty to turn into hate at this point. And that's why we have this polarization. I'm just trying to lobby that we find the commonalities that we all find important and allow ourselves to disagree on things, but that we always have those commonalities to go back to. And that is, safety, health, education, jobs, things like that.
It's what you came back to right at the beginning, isn't it? It's human rights. It's just the basic, what we need to, to function on the human level. Get those sorted, and then we can progress up. Well, look, when we were discussing over email to organise this, you said make sure you ask me some fun punk questions as well. So we'll throw a couple in as well, because it is really interesting, and I'm very grateful. But obviously, we're slightly different. I didn't just want to have another kind of generic newscaster interview. So you came out of the movement in your band, and you managed to tour with Joan Jett. So
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that. How's she?
Yeah,
she's
awesome. She's awesome. She's an amazing person, and also somebody who saved my life at a moment when I really was kind of struggling. So when I left the movement in January of '96, later on that year, I started a punk band, a non-political punk band. And it was an outlet for me. Had I not had that outlet, because music was really all I knew. At 15, I had started a white power band, opened a record store, had 2 bands, toured Germany, put out records. For most of my life up until that point, music was all I'd known. So I'd kind of thrown my energy into a punk band. And Joan Jett had asked us or her man, somebody needed an opener for her show, the promoter, and we got put on that show. And during our warm-up, she kind of came over and noticed that after we'd done doing our warm-up, I was in a pretty bad place, kind of emotionally, and she recognized that for whatever reason, and she kind of said, hey, I really enjoyed your set. You guys should come on tour for a couple of days in the Midwest with us. And after talking to her years later, I understand that was because she recognized in me that she knew I needed help, that I wasn't going to last very much longer had she not done that. So yeah, it's really all these people like Joan Jett, Mr. Holmes, the black security guard that I bumped into throughout my life that really kind of just breathed new life into me when I needed it the most. And it was, frankly, the people that in the past I would have hurt, somebody like the black security guard, or somebody like Joan Jett, who, is a proponent of LGBTQ rights. These are all people I would have hurt in the past, but they were also the ones who who saw something in me worth saving.
Big.
And she's the original punk rocker. I mean, how could you not love Joan Jett? I mean,
Exactly.
one of the coolest human beings ever.
Right, Matt, I think you're up.
All right. Another fun one. You're planning a road trip. You get to make the playlist. What song kicks off the road trip? Which one's the halfway point? And which one is playing as you arrive?
Oh, man. Tough one. Okay, Redemption song, not a punk song, but Redemption song, Bob Marley, kicking it off. Halfway through, again, not another punk song, but the lyrics really speak to me, and it's a band called Fun, and it's a song called Some Nights. And if you look at the lyrics, I swear to you, it is the story of my life. And as we're rolling up, I'm going to go for an old punk rock favorite, and most people aren't going to even recognize this band as a punk rock band, but Beastie Boys, No Sleep Till Brooklyn. Most people don't know that the Beastie Boys, man, when they first started out and were putting out 7 inches, were a hardcore band, and that to me is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's come up quite a bit in our group, actually. Is we've it's very few people do they?
But there would be a whole lot of peppered songs by The Clash, the best, the only band that matters, in my opinion, best band on earth. And my dark secret during my white power years was the biggest leftist band on earth, The Clash. I never told anybody I loved them before. I loved them after. My favorite band. There'd be some Ramones in there, definitely some Social Distortion, maybe even some rockabilly, some Reverend Horton Heat. Can't forget about some good old Chicago punk rock like Naked Raygun and Peg Boy too.
Nice.
One story that did actually make me laugh out loud when I was reading the book is your ex-bandmate who, if I read it right, effectively ripped off a Sick of It All riff and said,
yeah, totally.
Here's a song, I'm leaving, bye.
And we recorded it. So I was never a hardcore fan. Like, he was into kind of like hardcore before, and I was more into punk rock stuff. And he's like, I got this really cool riff. And it was 4 notes, like typical punk song. And we're all, digging it. It's a cool song. Eventually it like evolved into our own song, but unmistakably the opening of our song is a Sick of It All song. And I didn't know until after we'd recorded it and after he'd left the band and we were, at some show, he was like, somebody came up to us like, pretty cool Sick of It All song that you guys did major on. And I went back and I listened to that song and I was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed by it. But it was a good riff. I can't fault him for that.
It's funny. Because, one of the staunchly, anti-white power kind of
funny enough, years later, 20 years later, after wrote that song and was standing on stage at Warped Tour in like 2000 and I don't know 10 or 6 or something like that, on stage with Social Distortion, standing next to Luke Kohler of Sick of It All on the side of the stage. He was holding his baby, his son, I think it was at the time. I was there with my children. Old guys hanging out, old punk rockers hanging out on stage watching another kind of legendary punk band. It was kind of full circle.
Yeah. Does he know? Does he know the story?
I don't know. I didn't want to say it. I didn't want to mention it. He looked tougher than I did at the time.
Just in case. I mean, look,
Although I did punch Harley Flanagan in the jaw in Buffalo one time, singer of the Cro-Mags, many, many, many years ago.
Actually, that's a claim to fame. I mean, look, so... We've spoken a bit, obviously, on the punk scene, but I've thought about this quite a bit, and we've seen it with kind of in the news recently with people decrying Rage Against the Machine for being too political at the moment. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on whether you think we're going to have another kind of musical political resurgence, because in the Clash, Joe Strummer was very instrumental in Rock Against Racism, and the counter movements of that with the Infant Screwdriver, Rock Against Communism that you talk about. And then you've got in the 90s and noughties, you've got Fat Mike and Punk Voter and Rock Against Bush. Do you think that could surface again? Do you think,
Yeah, but I think it's going to be the hip hop movement that does it. I really think that's where we are going to see this next kind of music counterculture, this protest culture happen. And I welcome it because I don't think that there's any other genre of music that's closer to punk rock than hip hop. It's really kind of music of the youth, music from the street, music of a movement, really. a resistance movement, and I think that it has the same punk rock ethos of kind of fighting the broken system, of kind of community unity to fight this broken system. And I welcome it. I really think music, art just in general, is the truest form and the purest form of empathy. When we listen to music, when we look at art, we have to put ourselves in the shoes, in the soul of that artist, whether we're listening to it and hearing lyrics or whether we're looking at a painting or a photograph even. It is about understanding what that artist was trying to say at that moment. So I think that, music is a powerful platform for young people, but of course it can also be used for bad. It was used as propaganda in the 80s and 90s very, very effectively, and could potentially be used for that in the future as well.
Good stuff. Look, we're coming up on half an hour, so we'll kind of throw a few more music ones in there for you, and see how we go. No cheating. What was the last song you listened to?
I think you're gonna laugh. It was a Jim Croce song, and I have the vinyl here somewhere. I've got all my vinyl sitting back. Yeah, I was listening to a Jim Croce vinyl album. That's the last music I've listened to, and it was yesterday.
That's right.
Fantastic.
Disclaimer: the last song I listened to was some god awful thing that came on Spotify when my kid had it on shuffle this morning. So I don't know.
Man, it's like we've lost all the influencers when it comes to music, right? Like even in the old days, like you could listen to a DJ on the radio and they would be hit makers, right? They'd tell you what you'd like, and then that band would turn you on to other music, and that doesn't exist anymore except for the algorithms that are on your Spotify. Which I don't know, man. It's I like people recommending music to me, not something that measures the beat.
Yeah. If you liked A, you'll love C, and it's
sometimes it works. I mean, sometimes I've been pretty lucky with it, and I've been turned on to new bands. But I gotta say, I haven't found like a new band that I've been turned on to in a while because of that. And part of it is because you're not going to shows anymore and seeing opening bands, which is always a really great way to check out new music. But yeah, I miss it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You mentioned that in the group that we in Punk Rock Dads, that happens a lot where people will drop their favorite artist or an album, and I find that I'm finding more music that way that I like than through the Spotify algorithm. I think I lament a lot that Spotify just doesn't get me.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much good music out there that we're missing, right? I mean, but yeah, I think that's a great idea. So if I'll do that. I'll do the same. I'll reciprocate. I'm going to give your group one band that they need to check out, a band called Flatfoot 56. Celtic punk band from Chicago. They've been around for 15 years. Disclaimer, I used to manage them a long, long time ago, but I still think that they're one of the greatest live bands on the planet. If you just Google Flatfoot 56 and Wall of Death, and I know everybody's seen the Wall of Death at like a hardcore show or whatever, but you have not seen a Wall of Death at a Flatfoot show, I urge you to Google that. Another awesome band to check out, although they're defunct now and might be getting back together, as a band from Cincinnati called Foxy Shazam. Not terribly punk rock, like 80s, 90s punk rock, but so punk rock at heart. And again, one of the best live shows I think I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, there you go. There's a question for you then. What's been one of your kind of standout live shows? Who's really kind of taken it to the next level for you?
Riverboat Gamblers. I think the Riverboat Gamblers out of Texas, again, one of the best live bands I've ever seen. But every time I see them, no matter how much older they're getting, they never fail to bring it. Mike Wiebe, the singer, last time I saw him, I took a video of him stage diving off of a chandelier and then straight onto the floor onto his neck, where he had to go to the hospital and was in traction for 2 months because of it, and then came right back out and played another show. It was pretty amazing. So it's if you get a chance to see the Riverboat Gamblers out of Austin, they're amazing.
One for me, shout to one of the guys in our group, one of the best live acts that I've seen, particularly recently, Authority Zero. Chris Daly, shout out to Chris, the drummer, also in Pulley and Implants. They're in our group, Chris. They put on one hell of a show. They're a seriously good live act.
funny story. So I actually know those guys, not very well, but had a lot of interactions with them. In my career, after I left the movement, I managed bands. I had a record label. I even was the executive producer for a music television show, a pretty famous one called JBTV, out of the United States and here in Chicago. And Authority Zero was one of the bands that we had on our show. It was live performances and interviews and music videos. And this was probably, 2009, 10, something like that. Had Authority Zero on the show. And they also toured with one of the bands that I had managed, a band called The Frantic. I'm probably around that same time frame too. So good guy. I can definitely vouch for you. Authority Zero. Those guys are great. Yeah. Phoenix, I think. Phoenix, Arizona, if I'm not mistaken.
So, yeah, they're an incredible live act. So, yeah, it's good. I've seen them once or twice. So I think this is Matt's question, which I love. I never would have thought of it, but I think we should finish on this one. What do you reckon? The final question, Matt? Go for it. We're coming up to 35 minutes, so it's a good wrap up time.
You bet. You might be able to relate, Christian. I'm a big fan of brackets. I love March Madness, but I don't watch NCAA. And in our group, Chris has organized brackets for the best punk band, which has already been decided in our group. But right now, today, is the final for best punk album all time. On one hand, we have Rancid and Out Come the Wolves. And on the other hand, we have Bad Religion, Stranger Than Fiction.
Oh,
yeah.
Man, listen, I will only give it to Bad Religion because they've been around longer. And just because I still have to look up words that Greg Graffin uses in his lyrics. I still don't understand. Although I got to give it to Rancid too. They're a great band, another great live band, inspired kind of the resurgence of punk rock, them and Green Day based off of old bands that I grew up listening to. But I'm going to give it to Bad Religion. We'll eke this one out just for the sheer fact that they probably put out twice as many albums as Rancid, if not 3 times as many, and have been doing it longer.
I think we initially they put out 18, 19 studio albums, and like 11 made it into the competition, and Stranger Than Fiction got into the final. So
good stuff.
And
that's a close one. That's going to go into overtime. I think that one. Bad Religion may eke it out, but that one's definitely a double overtime.
That's it. Yeah. They won the band competition before, because obviously the Facebook group really kicked off when when lockdown kicked in. So the guy started, Richard.
I'll leave your audience with this funny story. One of the coolest small venue shows I've ever seen was Bad Religion. I was at a club called Double Door in Chicago, probably in the mid 90s. And I saw Tim Armstrong and Joey Ramone at after a Warped Tour concert at like a gas station in the tour bus. They were going in to buy like soda and chips and things like that. And I was with a friend getting gas. And here we are at like this gas station truck stop, looking at Joey Ramone and Tim Armstrong and Lars Fredriksson. And it was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Couldn't say anything to him. Didn't say anything to him because I was too in shock. But
those are the moments that make it, though, aren't they?
Absolutely.
They're the takeover. Listen, look, Christian, appreciate you coming on.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
my pleasure.
Really good. Yeah, good stuff.
Thank you guys. Peace.
Cheers.
No. I won't do it this way to you because that means something different to you, right, Chris?
It does indeed.
This means peace.
It does indeed. Yeah.
So,
no
thank you guys.
No worries. Thanks a lot, man. Cool.
Long live punk rock.
Yeah. Bless you. Take care.
Cheers.